Thank you, everybody, for logging in to Wise, Witty and Weird. And I just want to say to everybody, though, that this is a fabulous channel to belong to because we talk about some crazy stuff. That is myself and Avery, and we'd like you to join in with the conversations that we have here on Wise, Witty and Weird. So I hope you enjoy today's video. Thanks for joining us. And just remember, if you can, please join us on Patreon. We'd love to see you. And also, we would love to have you subscribe to us and to ring the bell for future notifications. Thanks very much for being with us, everybody. Take care, look after yourselves, and I hope you enjoy the video. Hi, everyone, and thanks for being here. As we just said in our intro, it's great that you could be a part of Wise, Witty and Weird, this community which is about expressing ourselves in the most bizarre and appropriate ways possible. So today, though, I'm going to talk about one of my favourite subjects, and I must confess, I just love this man because he's just full of interesting and exciting things to talk about. And of course, I'm talking about Andrew Bolt. Now, I have been sitting back waiting for the right-wing media to start to have a go at the left of politics, and particularly in the United States. They tend to not... It's interesting how they're not as focused here in Australia, the Sky News in particular, on our left wing. They're more focused, it seems to me, often on the right wing. And maybe that's because I don't watch enough Sky News. I do accept that, and I take responsibility for that lack of judgment, if you like. But what I was interested in was the other day I noticed that there was a comment made by Bolt that needed to, I guess, be recorded so that we can, for posterity's sake, have a look at the way this man has taken on the left, and particularly US. So I've been waiting for this comment, these things to erupt in relation to the inadequacies that the right would see in relation to Biden. And lo and behold, Andrew Bolt presented it in the most magnificent format. And we do thank you, Andrew, because you're an absolute gem. You present the biggest load of crap I've ever seen in my life. And you do it with such honesty and integrity and knowledge and forethought and every other adverb I can think of. You're amazing because you're such a jerk. And when I think of the things that you presented here today, as we're about to talk about, perhaps a lot of you out there would tend to agree with me. And if you've got any comments, please make them down below. We'd be happy to respond to those as soon as you've made them, hopefully. But this is what Andrew's been saying. I'm just going to play a little bit of what he's been saying. And then today I recorded a clip also from the ABC, as the Australian Broadcasting Commission, in relation to what a response that there is to Andrew's comments about Biden and what is done in relation to Iran. But it's self-explanatory, so we'll run through a little bit of what Biden said. I'll interrupt it every now and again to make my comments, but this is basically what Andrew Bolt had to say.
Are we allowed to say it already? I'm missing Donald Trump already. I know that the way he ended as president, claiming he was robbed of the election and trying to stop Joe Biden from being declared president, I thought that's it for me, for one. I mean, it was just too much. But then comes Joe Biden. And I have to say that his first big moves as president in foreign affairs have really got me worried.
I do need to say that it is interesting that Bolt would think that whatever Trump did in terms of the insurrection was, even for him, it was over the pale. After lauding this man for 4 years, suddenly he's realised that he has done something that is unacceptable, and he's prepared at least to say so. I cannot understand why he didn't make those sorts of comments let me think, 4 or 5 years ago, when the man started to talk about women in certain ways and you know, people that come from overseas, and people that are of a different colour, and people that whose sons have died in service to the United States. Why isn't it then that this man didn't choose to talk about that stuff? No, he now realises after Trump incited the insurrection that that was unacceptable and beyond the pale. So he's been sitting on his hands waiting since that event to be able to criticise Biden. And here he goes.
And I don't just mean that bit that we've all commented here on Sky, where he called the differences between him and the Chinese dictator, the man who has crushed democracy in Hong Kong, who has locked up 1 million Muslim Chinese, who's jailed even Australians on fake charges to get them and us to shut up. He actually washed away all these differences and more as mere cultural differences.
I point out to him, no American president can be sustained as a president if he doesn't reflect the values of the United States. And so the idea, I'm not going to speak out against what he's doing in Hong Kong, what he's doing with the Uyghurs in western mountains of China, and Taiwan trying to end the one China policy by making it forceful. I said, and by the way, he said he gets it. Culturally, there are different norms at each country, and their leaders are expected to follow.
Now, that's one thing, you know, because I get it, you know, Joe Biden.
I just want to make the point that we need to accept that there are cultural differences between each country, and we need to understand what those cultural differences are. Once we understand those differences, we're then able to formulate decisions that are going to be about taking into consideration those differences and perhaps finding a pathway forward by finding a place in the middle that we can start to negotiate in order to settle the differences that we do have. And I think for Biden to talk about that is more than reasonable. And I think to some extent Andrew Bolt agrees with that, but the fact that he raised it as a deficit for Biden, I find quite interesting, and also it might tell us a little bit about Bolt's inability to be able to understand the intricacies that sit within diplomacy. You know, the man's been a journalist all his life. Clearly, he's not a diplomat.
It's very rambly these days. The mouth not engaging with the brain. Things come out all weird. Judged by how people act, I guess. And on that more serious note is an issue that you may not even have heard of. Far more serious. Such a terrible contrast.
Oh my God, I have to comment about that. So he's criticising Biden for the way he acts. And for 4 or 5 years prior to Biden, we've had the moron in chief who acts badly in every circumstance that one can imagine. And I'm sure that if Trump or someone like him was on the left, he would be criticised incessantly, continuously for his bad behaviour. And so I can't understand why suddenly you would now start to criticise Biden for his bad behaviour, because at the moment there isn't any. He's just simply doing the job that he was supposed to do to start with. So this is what else, though, he has to say.
It makes too between Biden and Trump. 2 weeks ago, a Shiite terrorist group in Iraq, but backed by Iran, claimed credit for firing 24 rockets at a US base in the Kurdish part of Iraq. Now, by some miracle, only one American soldier was among the wounded, and only one non-US contractor was killed. Now, there seems little doubt that Iran or its state-funded terror proxies, they're testing this new president. How strong is he really? And so far, Biden's team has not hit back. They talk about needing investigation to see who really did it and reserving options and all that kind of stuff. Now, to start with, this is not the Donald Trump way. Direct comparison.
Now, this is the point that we're going to be looking at, that he didn't hit back immediately, because that's what Donald Trump would do. Donald Trump wouldn't think about it. I mean, we need to think about what Donald Trump did in terms of leaving the Kurds on their own at the Turkish border and the impact that that had on one of the strongest fighting forces that the Allies had in that particular region. And so we know from history, we know historically, even from Trump's experience, that he doesn't act responsibly in places like the Middle East. And here, this man is justifying or criticising Biden for what he sees as his lack of action in that particular area, particularly in relation to Iran and Iran bombing the Allies as they did a week or so ago. He did say that Biden was taking his time, and remember this, that Biden was taking time to evaluate the situation. So let's just see where else that goes.
2019, another Iranian-backed terror group in Iraq, Kataib Hezbollah, fired a missile that killed an American contractor. Now, Trump did not muck around. He ordered 5 of this group's bases bombed. And when the group's supporters then laid siege to the US embassy in Baghdad, Trump ordered a missile strike that, what a coincidence, killed both that group's leader plus Iran's most revered general, who just happened to be visiting him in Baghdad, no doubt to talk about the weather or the cricket or something. What a coincidence. And that general left Iraq in pieces when the missile dropped on his head. Now, crude and brutal, you may say, but it sure sent a message, and that message was received by that terror group. And last year, it promised not to attack American targets in Iraq again. But in...
Can we be a little bit clearer about what happened in relation to that assassination attempt? The understandings that I had at the time was that the Israelis were involved, not necessarily the Americans and not necessarily Trump. So I'm not 100% sure whether Bolt has got this right. But there again, you know, they have the resources of Sky News and Murdoch Press and all these other people around the world. So maybe they do have it right. But my recollection is just slightly different to that. And perhaps I'm wrong.
Comes Joe Biden. And it's too obvious. Iran might not have ordered this attack a couple of weeks back, but Iran can be warned. You stop your militias, or they or you will pay, and we're not quite careful about it, just who. But Biden fired no warning shots. Instead, he wants more diplomacy with Iran. He wants to negotiate. He wants to junk Donald Trump's policy to cripple the Iranian elite with sanctions until it gives up its nuclear plans. And obviously, you've heard Iran saying he wants to wipe out Israel. He wants instead to get Iran to go back to a soft deal that the Obama administration, where Biden was vice president, a soft deal that administration offered that, hey, let us inspect your nuclear sites, let us make sure you're not building nuclear weapons, a deal that obviously failed. That's why Donald Trump junked it. But Iran is so far not playing ball with this nice, new, polite, sensitive Biden. It seems to think Biden is weak. Can't imagine why. And it's playing him. I mean, here is Biden.
No, Trump dumped it because it was an Obama idea. Anything that represented Obama, Trump trashed. It was as simple as that. This is not a man smart enough to even understand what that deal meant. It was a complicated deal. Very few people probably understand it anyway. But I can pretty much assure everybody that the reason why it was dumped was because it was Obama who negotiated it. They're endeavouring, that is, the Biden administration is endeavouring to get back into that deal and to ensure that Iran follow it through. Because, as I understand it, Iran were complying, regardless of what the right wing says. Iran were complying with that deal until Trump abandoned it. And after that, they started to enrich uranium so they could make nuclear missiles. Well done, Trump. But we don't actually hear Mr. Bolt talking about that, now do we?
Biden offering a deal, just after a rocket attack on US bases, just after a Belgian court sentenced an Iranian diplomat to 20 years for planning a bomb attack in Brussels. And just as Iran told international weapons inspectors it would give them even less access than before to its nuclear sites. Now, if you don't think Biden is sending a terrible sign of weakness, then you do not know how fascist tyrannies work. And remember, Iran is probably the world's biggest sponsor of terror groups. And that is why I am now missing Donald Trump.
Well, I just think that that's the most bizarre reason for Miss Donald Trump, because he does outlandish things and he blows people up, and people like Bolt really, I think, need to take some time out to think about what all of this actually means, because today a different picture was presented, and we'll have that presented via the ABC. Let's listen to what they have to say about the same subject that Bolt's talking about.
Facilities in eastern Syria used by Iran-backed militias. It was in retaliation for recent rocket attacks on US troop locations in Iraq. Here's our Middle East correspondent, Tom Joyner, who joins me on the desk. And Tom, we know that this airstrike is the first known military action by the Biden administration. Can you take us through exactly what happened?
Well, Kath, these airstrikes launched by the US against what the Pentagon, the US Defense Department, describes as Iranian-backed militias happened overnight in eastern Syria, so quite far from any major cities. But we know that they were directed at some facilities that the Pentagon says were used by these Iranian-backed militias. We don't know if there are any human casualties necessarily, but as you said, this is likely a retaliation. The US was attacked. Its US military base at Erbil International Airport earlier this month was attacked, and in that attack 9 Americans were wounded. So this is likely a retaliation. This sort of pattern of attack and retaliation isn't entirely uncommon in the Middle East between the US and Iran, especially over the last few years of the Trump presidency. But as you said, it's a really interesting time because this is the first known military strike under a Biden administration. President Biden, of course, taking office earlier this year, hasn't really had a chance yet to formulate his doctrine on foreign policy. And so what we're seeing now is really the first steps towards perhaps what that will look like over the next 4 years. Let's have a listen to what the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin had to say.
We're confident in the target that we went after. We know what we hit, and we're confident that that target was being used by the same Shia militia that conducted the strikes. We're very deliberate about our approach, as you would expect us to be. We allowed and encouraged the Iraqis to investigate and develop intelligence, and that was very helpful to us in refining the target.
It's particularly interesting timing, isn't it, Tom, when you look at US-Iran relations?
That's right, Kath. This strike, against the backdrop of it, recently the US announced its intentions to begin talks to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal. This is a deal that in 2015 was organised under the Obama administration between the US, Iran and a handful of Western powers, that was designed to prevent Tehran, the Iranian government, from acquiring nuclear weapons in exchange for eased sanctions. These sanctions have crippled the Iranian economy. That deal remained for 4 years until 2019, when under the Trump presidency, President Trump famously withdrew from that agreement, describing the nuclear deal as defective. But it's only just recently that the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said that the US is interested in rejoining that deal. So it'll be really interesting to watch how this strike or any future strikes potentially might play out against the backdrop of those negotiations.
OK, Tom Joyner, many thanks for joining us.
So here we have Biden still responding to the strikes against the allies, and he hasn't just taken a knee-jerk reaction. He's considered all the implications of this, and he's certainly let the Iranians know that such behaviour is not acceptable. You strike us, we strike you back, and regardless of the negotiation. So I think the thing that Andrew Bolt doesn't understand is that you can still have this sort of conflict and you can still have the negotiations, because the United States and Europe and Britain have the ability to be able to put forward sanctions that can cripple Iran. And that is more devastating to them in many ways than some airstrikes to some military base somewhere. So you can balance those two things at the same time, send a strong message and still negotiate for another Iranian deal so that they don't develop nuclear weapons. Andrew Bolt, you're wrong. And as usual, I'm not right. But I'm just letting people know that sometimes those views that we hear from other people like Andrew Bolt are mischievous. And he was too early. He was too anxious and eager to find something critical that he needed to say around Biden. And when that opportunity came up, because Biden didn't respond with a knee-jerk response, he decided that that was something that he needed to mention on Sky News, because he wanted to point out to all his viewers what a terrible person Biden is, what a terrible thing the United States administration is under someone like Biden. And he is longing. I can't believe that someone would say that, not in Australia. It makes you wonder about his mentality, that he's longing for Trump to be returned. I can't even conceive as to what would be in the man's mind that would even wish such a disaster to fall upon any nation, even the United States. So, look, everybody, thanks for being with me. I've enjoyed having you here, and I just want to remind you that if you would like to, Avery and I do this as volunteers, but it'd be really helpful if you could help us out by simply going to Patreon, Wise, Witty and Weird, and contributing, $1 a month, who cares? Just contribute to us so that we can continue to do this work. And if you could all remember to subscribe, and where possible to also ring the bell so that you can get notifications in the future. Thanks everybody for being here. It's been great being with you. If you've got any comments that you want to make, please do so below. Thanks a lot. Take care and be safe.